Hello. I'm up here, yeah. It's a guy you don't think is wearing socks, but he actually is. I've had a lot of people ask me about that today. I don't think they've been paying attention to anything else, actually. Just because you don't see something doesn't mean it's not there. That's all it's saying. It's kind of like a port, right? A lot of things going on. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed the conference so far, that you've been having some productive conversations, that you enjoyed the lunch and the networking and the ideas labs we just had. First time we've done those here. Obviously, it's a chance to drill down. Maybe a quick poll. Green if you found the ideas labs beneficial and productive for you. Red if not. For those who are voting, it's pretty much unanimous. Yeah, okay, good. So we'll work on producing some output on those that we can share around so that those of you who obviously didn't participate in one will learn a little bit more about what was said in the other. And we'll keep the conversation going. Speaking of evaluation and your feedback, we have now put evaluation forms are on the table. You can also do this in the app, by the way, if you prefer to do it. But if you like pen and paper, and it's easier that way, do fill out the evaluation forms, which, like I said, are on the desk in front of you. Either leave them there, and we'll collect them afterwards, or you can give them to me or any member of our team. We always bang on about this, but it's true. Your feedback is really essential to us, and to keep kind of innovating and improving this event. And as you know, we do events across North America, throughout the calendar, and across the world, really. So any of your feedback is valuable for what we continue to do across events, across our platform. So do let us know. After this session as well, or let's say after the next hour and a half at 5:30, we're going across the road to Tirnog for the Surf and Turf barbecue hosted by the Port of Baltimore. So Anu and our other panelists who will join us later have only has the task of keeping you entertained and awake until then. But we've got a lot going on over the next hour plus, which I think will do that, including a bit of a new format here, or a different format to what we've probably been doing at most of our events, and certainly at this event, with what we're calling a fireside chat with Anu, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, and obviously we'll move on to it. Later in the session, we'll bring some other panelists on board. We have a presentation from NADA, from the National Association, National Automotive Dealers Association, and we'll be joined on stage by a few other panelists from GM and Nissan for a Q&A. So we're going to go in multiple segments, and we're also going to fit some more polling in that mix there. Like we did in the first session where we asked your opinion, we're going to use the app again to ask you some. And actually, although we're going to do the polling a bit later, I'd like to once again open up the next question so that you can log on and start thinking about it, and we'll do them then. But again, it's on the app. By now, I'm sure you've all downloaded it because we've been talking about it enough. And you go into polling and the question which we'll make live there shortly, and then you can vote on that. But before we do all the voting, obviously, as I mentioned, we're going to very pleased that Anu Goel could join us here. Anu is Executive Vice-President for Group After Sales and Services at the Volkswagen Group of America, and Anu brings 30 years of experience, Anu, in this sector, more or less. You wouldn't believe it from age. Obviously started at 15 or so, but Anu will give us some perspective, as we're calling it, sort of life as an OEM, right? So we're not necessarily going to be talking here about operational throughput and capacity issues and the day-to-day things which are really important and obviously we're addressing, but a bit more about the decision-making, the strategy, the high points, the low points that come with working for an OEM in the logistics space, and clearly also someone at Anu's level, who Anu's responsible both for ultimately for the vehicle logistics side, but also after sales and service parts. So brings a really great perspective there. Do we have that question that we can pop up quickly, just again, so that you can, So again, just on the voting bit before we go into the Q&A, we'd like you to tell us. We opened up the conference talking about what you saw as the biggest challenge facing North American vehicle imports and exports. You voted 45% for the tariff thing, or threat. So this question is, what is currently the biggest opportunity for North American vehicle imports and exports? So the options we put there, do you see the opportunities in the U.S. in terms of U.S. vehicle production growing and continuing to develop there? Is it, for example, Mexican vehicle production? Is it exports beyond North America? Is it capital investment in ports and hinterland links? Or is it technology advances in systems and communication? So we leave that open. You can go into the app at any point and vote, and we'll come back to it later and show your answers. But for now, I think we'll move on to our fireside chat. That's why we'll go join Anu over here. Obviously, we'll be chatting here and asking questions. But yes, we've lit the fire now. Keep it nice and toasty. And the questions, we'll keep this open as well. So you can put questions on the app too. We will have mics going around. And so you can also pose questions to Anu as we go through this. Anu, I thought we might start kind of with a bit of a run through. Obviously, I mentioned 30 years in the industry, a good time of that with Ford. Obviously, also with Case New Holland before coming to Volkswagen 5 years ago.
About six
years ago. So a couple of different kinds of manufacturers there as well. What would you point to, if we're talking about the logistics and as an OEM, what were some of the high points in your career at this point?
Well, first of all, we're going to sit by a fireside. I'm used to doing this with a cognac.
Can we please arrange that, actually?
Right? That was the enhancement or the enticement to do this. See, if we're talking about it, if I understand the question right, logistics in the past 30 years, high points, low points, right? I'll give you a couple. I think some we've talked about in previous conferences as well. One is the swing toward providing a level of service that customers expect, as opposed to providing a level of service that we either think they need or that our system can provide. Right? Because they're two different things. I mean, if you start with the basic question on who's the customer, and I think we've talked about this previously as well, if the traditional take from an OEM is the customer is the dealership, it's the parts manager, it's the service manager, it's the new sales department. If you ask them what they're looking for versus if you ask a vehicle owner, odds are you're going to get different answers. Right? So if you ask the vehicle owner and you start working to do what the vehicle owner is looking for, then I think you help drive customer satisfaction better. So we've done that in all three of the OEMs that I've been with. You start with the customer view, customer being the vehicle owner. So let's take, let's do a service parts example. What's the expectation for a customer on a repair of their car? Is it drive in while you wait? Is it you're going to keep my car overnight? Is it you're going to keep my car a week or 2 weeks? You don't want to go, right? It's not something you expect to be doing. So me, I drive in. I don't want to be there in the first place, but if I'm there, I want the car fixed while I wait, and I'm going to argue 30 to 45 minutes is the amount of time I'm willing to wait. So to do that, and we service in the Volkswagen group between Audi and VW 210,000 different part numbers. How many other dealers are going to stock? Right? So what are the odds of them having that part there to repair your vehicle as you drive in? So you got to work to set up systems that say you incentivize them to stock 85% off the shelf fill is best in class. How do you set up a system that entices them to have the right parts to have an 85% off the shelf fill? And then how do you develop a system that says if they don't have, because you don't want them stocking those parts that aren't going to be in there, you get it to them overnight before they open the next morning so the customer's out by lunchtime. In the past, it was, you know what, customer comes in, I'll get them the parts in 1 to 4 days, depending how far they are from my facility, and they'll have their car back in a week. And you know what? We may give them a loaner, we may not give them a loaner. So, long way of saying the change toward customer focus, right? We put full body covers on some of our vehicles. if you're a dealer, do you want the full body cover? Right? Okay, and you can argue yes, no. Who's responsible for disposing of it? Why does the full body cover exist? So if you start asking those questions, right, I think you get more customer focused, you get faster, leaner, cheaper, faster, right? All the things that people look for. And that's the change, the big change I've seen in logistics over my career, moving toward the vehicle owner as the customer, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, do you think, just from your area's responsibility, does vehicle logistics have a bit further to go in that regard, perhaps in relation even to service parts from that side?
Yeah, I mean, let's say something, and my team's sitting over here, right? Hey, all right.
Yes.
Yeah. Hey, very cool. Yeah. Hey, cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Wow.
We might get a little bit looser with time now. I have to say.
Yeah, I got all day. That's pretty good. Thank you very much. Wow. I'm glad I came.
Customer service, by the way, people. Customer service.
Yeah, I'm a vehicle owner. So I think your question was on vehicle logistics, we have more to go. I was saying the team's sitting over here. I'd say absolutely. You could ask them who are customers on the vehicle logistics side. Is it the vehicle owner? Is it the dealer? Or is it our brand partners that are looking to hit a wholesale target? And the answer is it's our brand partners that are looking to hit a wholesale target, and in most cases, cost be damned, right? So if you're a vehicle owner, what's your expectation from finished vehicle delivery, right? We've got some level of transparency now with an ETA project on the Audi side, working to get there on the VW side. So if you're a customer and you now know your car's scheduled to be built, let's just say you can go all the way back in the supply chain. I ordered a car, I know now it's being built and it's being built overseas. Great, I got a date, I'm happy, right? I now know it's on a boat, right? I now know it's hit the US port. I'm not happy that it took 27 days, right? Because I don't understand why it takes 27 days or whatever to get to the port. And then help me understand why it sat in the port for 2 weeks. It hits the US shore, I want the car tomorrow, right? So you got to start thinking about, I love the fact that we have transparency and we're giving that to our customers, but by giving them that information, are we disappointing them on their expectation, right? Do they care that we give our carriers 3 days to build efficient loads to get a car out of the port? Do they care that it takes 2 days to install a specific accessory that they ordered? No. That car's there, the port's 100 miles from my house, why can't I go pick it up? Right? So, yes, the simple answer, yes, there's ways to go. Right?
Yeah. Well, there's risks to some of the transparency in the vehicle logistics supply chain.
But it's less of a risk than no transparency.
Absolutely. What has not, that's perhaps the high point, and move towards more customer focus. That's improved. Has further to go. What's the low? I mean, what has not, either because it hasn't changed as it should have, or it's changed for the worse?
That's an interesting question. Are we valued in the organization? Right? I mean, it's we're over 40% of our company's cost base.
A Volkswagen Group of America.
Volkswagen Group of Americas, right? If you start looking around and every company gets cost tasks, where do you go first? Right? We're a significant portion of the inventory, the capital expenditure. Right? We keep adding new models. The average car is going to have 4,000 service part numbers on it. Yeah. Our vehicles are getting bigger. You're going to get fewer on a truck. You're going to get fewer on rail. It's going to be more expensive to ship them. You think anybody cares? Right? So are you valued, and do you get the investment to continue to improve? So if you're on the customer satisfaction journey and you start off here and you make some improvements with viewing the customer first and you get up to here and you want to get there and you know how to get there, but it's going to take some level of investment of time, people, resources, money, et cetera, and you can't get it, because money's going to be spent elsewhere or it isn't there. I think that's a low point. And arguably one of my biggest disappointments was we'd made a lot of progress in one of the companies I was at in my prior life, and we got to #1 in customer sat, and then we dismantled it. So we dismantled what we spent 8 to 10 years pulling together and tearing apart something that blood, sweat, and tears to put in place, fighting to get there and delivered, and then being asked to take it apart when you know darn well it's going to be more expensive after you take it apart. Right? I mean, it's the old oxymoron. If you go to next day stock order, you get parts delivered cheaper than if you have a higher percentage of emergency orders, right? Because FedEx is more expensive than dedicated trucks. So if your service deteriorates, there's going to be a higher percentage of overnight orders, which are more expensive. And unless you have even if you have a surcharge, the dealer's paying for it, and the customer's eventually going to pay for it. It's a more expensive total cost proposition than what we have in place. But it's tough to get people to understand that, right? Take a layperson, right? Because most of my bosses over the years have been sales and marketing guys. And you try to explain to them that it is cheaper to ship every day than every 3 days. Are they going to get it first time around? No. So that's the disappointment, right? Tearing apart something you put in place.
Right. Yeah, I can imagine that that argument for speed on the service parts side is difficult to get across. It perhaps even more difficult on the vehicle side.
Yeah, not to mention improved quality because it's going on a dedicated truck versus in a plane and through the meat grinder. Right? You can put it all together. You put the business case there, and some, excuse the language, is bullshit. Okay, next.
Yeah. What? I mean, it's easy, again. What can help that? I mean, is it you going onto the board, getting logistics higher up in a company decision-making process? What?
I was always taught. Our job is to identify opportunities and risks, and lay out what it takes to materialize the opportunities and minimize the risk. Okay. So how do you do what you're saying? And this will sound bad, and it'll sound negative and pessimistic, but to me, it's almost people aren't good. Sometimes people will not believe you. You got to fail to prove yourself right, and that's a risk politically. Here's what I'm going to tell you is going to happen. Because here's what happens. I mean, just a real-world situation. This is what I think is going to happen. And you hear either I don't believe you or something else, right? And then you go back with your team and you work to minimize the risk of what you told your boss is going to happen. And if you can make the risk go away, they say, see, I told you so, without knowing what went into it behind the scenes, right? Or you fail, right? So what you said would happen actually materialized, and they look at you and go, you don't know what the hell you're doing. So, I mean, I've had the chat with a couple of my bosses where, look, we'll do our best to minimize this. I'm telling you this is what's going to happen. This is based on years of experience. There's data and facts lined up behind it. What you're basically telling me is I have to fail to prove to you I'm right. And they kind of look at you and go, yeah, okay, right? So how do you get that elevated in an OEM? And I get it. There's cost pressures. The lifeblood of an OEM is product development. And if you can't come up with cash to fund new vehicles, none of this stuff matters. So I get it, and that's the world we toil in. And it's actually kind of cool. Yeah. I mean, otherwise, why do it? Right? I mean, I've worked with good people. It's fun. We figure it out. It's what we do. But it'd be nice to have a little bit more appreciation. I mean, it sounds bad, right? Looking for a pat on the back. A little better understanding or a seat at the table on some of these things. Yeah. Right? And I haven't figured out, I mean, maybe if we failed more often, people may believe us a little bit more, right? But the people sitting at that table will say, you know, hey, look, boss, I'm looking at a $11 million risk and it comes in $1 million. That's a hell of a job, yeah. Right? And 1 million's decimal dust in the whole scheme, right? So they figure it out.
we're talking about life as an OEM here, so maybe can you give us some insight into the decision-making process for a company like Volkswagen Group? What does it take to bring a new idea into a complex network like that you run, whether on a big level or a small level? I mean, how much local authority an initiative can be taken, how much has to get signed off by Wolfsburg, and the kind of everything in between sort of thing. Obviously, it's you can go as deep or as light as you want to tread on there. You might want to take a big sip.
Yeah, no, I already did. It's because those are the kind of questions that get you fired. I mean, after the issue we went through over the last several years, part of what we've done is restructure, and decision-making authority has been brought into the North American region, which is kind of cool, right? Trying to get people sitting 5,000 miles away in a market where we have 2% market share on the VW side to listen to this market, right? Very customer focused, very price sensitive, right? Is a difficult thing to do. So bringing those decisions here is good. We've established a weekly North American leadership meeting. It's on Monday afternoons from 1 to 3. And that's the opportunity to raise the issues, right? The culture is starting to, I mean, it's not where it needs to be, but it's starting to change where we are in control of our business. And we have the authority now with engineering and purchasing to make decisions here locally, right? So the old, it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission. That's kind of out the window now because the authority is here. But to me, there's a bigger element in any OE that you work in to bring issues for logistics to the table. The person sitting at that table has to have the cojones to do it, right? You sit there too often. I mean, just look at the agenda. First thing, some comments from your CEO. All right, great, right? Just what's going on with business. Second, sales update, right? Third, production update. Fourth, financial update. Fifth, quality update. Sixth, HR. Seventh, public relations. Eighth, logistics. You got a 2-hour meeting. What are the odds of getting to number 8? Okay, your slides have been submitted. That's great. Thank you very much. Right? We'll cover it the next meeting. Next week, same friggin' thing. Now, that's an exaggeration. We are now third on the list.
Okay.
Right? And the way you do that is you sit down with your boss and you walk them through stuff that we're missing. So it's now sales, financials, us, right. Which is cool. We've moved up, whether it be symbolically. It's the old people are our most important asset, but it's the 12th thing we talk about. Right. Okay, if that's truly the case, then why aren't we as leaders having that as the number one agenda item, right? So same thing. So you got to be able to, you got to have the, I don't know if it's force of personality. I got 30 years, right? If someone wants to dump me, so be it, right? It's, my life will change a little bit, but not a ton. So you could argue I've gained courage as I've gained years. Right. But that, I think, is incumbent on logistics and operational leaders to make what we do known, right? And get yourself elevated in the priority.
Yeah. Well, encouraging that you've moved up the list there. I mean, it could also be because there's been more problems in there, so it gets a bit more focused.
Yeah, that was answer B.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Create chaos and then they'll pay attention. That kind of leads into the next question a little bit. And again, I'm not doing these questions to try and get you fired, I promise. But if we...
We're sitting next to one.
That's true.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. That's even more symbolism, isn't it? But, you know, obviously Volkswagen Group, okay, depending on how you consolidate the figures, is either the biggest in the world or, you know, clearly it's up there. Not, as you alluded to earlier, in the US. So, you know, is there, in the logistics sense, we talk about economies of scale, we talk about the benefits of that, but then we also talk about nimbleness and flexibility. You know, are you nimble where you need to be nimble, and are you big where you need to be big, or sometimes does it feel the opposite?
I think a few years ago, it was the opposite. I do not get directive on how to run logistics in the North American region. All right? I never have. I get questions about what the hell are you doing? I get questions about, that's not how Spain, France, and the UK do it. Yeah. And they're the benchmark markets, right? Take a map of Germany and overlay it on the state of Texas or Minnesota and help them understand the size of this country, right? So I'll argue we get questions that are non-value added questions because people have to prove that they're adding value. But no, I think one of the benefits of Volkswagen is we have the autonomy to run our region, and we have the benefit of scale and size with the mothership, right? Now, can it always be better? Yes, it can, but yeah, that's...
Yeah, okay, great, yeah. So what, looking out a little bit now, what do you see? What do you think is going to change the most for your team, for your area? I mean, we talk about technology, we talk about trade, we talk about all of these things. I mean, I'm sure it's not any one of them, but what comes to mind for you as you look out?
Yeah, I mean, all those things are going, and I view that as just normal part of business, right? I think the true game changer, at least from where I sit right now, is electric vehicles. It's going to change the service parts business, right? 30-40% of maintenance, light repair will go away. You have to find additional revenue streams. Are we prepared infrastructure-wise to handle these vehicles? Right? And we're getting there. We don't know yet, have a firm grasp of the volume or the customer's expectations. For those, you could debate shared ownership, subscription services, ride sharing. I think we talked about this earlier. There's an article out there that says a third of the volume of U.S. vehicles sold in 5 years is going to be fleet. Right? Fleet's a blip on our radar screen right now in the U.S. Yeah. What are the expectations of fleet owners for vehicles, right, for service? And I don't think we have that. Sitting here today, we've got ideas, we're working on things, we don't have that figured out. How do you handle the batteries with dealers, right? What's the infrastructure going to be in this country? Those types of things, right? And then when you start looking for additional revenue streams, this is about data. Right? Who owns the data? We were talking earlier, privacy laws, right? All that stuff comes into it. That, to me, whoever's sitting in my chair 5 to 10 years from now, when I'm actually sitting around one of these, is going to have a different job than I have today, right? And that's what I think about, but we haven't spent enough, we haven't fully laid it out, right? That I think is the rest of the stuff, we know we'll deal with different tariffs, right? We'll deal with whatever happens to NAFTA, right? That's normal business, you figure it out. We deal with exchange rates, right? Okay, fine. What's truly changing in the business? And I think it's the fleet, the ride sharing, and whether you call it e-mobility, electric vehicles. That's the game changer. Okay.
So it's you're not losing too much sleep over the NAFTA and tariff issue.
No, I lose sleep over tweets, but yeah, not over the.
I mean, because can you even really do anything for those right now? Can you contingency plan from a logistics point of view?
You can, but how many of them are you going to put in place and invest in until you know?
Right.
Yeah. Right? Are we going to change our manufacturing footprint on the if come? Right? You can plan ahead and say, what would I do? Right? How would I approach it? But we're not changing anything until we know. Right? Because you get it completely wrong. Either way, you're going to get it wrong. Right? So. Focus on what you can focus on, right? And then go from there.
So the fire is burning bright here. It's warm. We can go on and on. But is there anyone from the audience who, I know you've been deprived. You don't have any cognac to go with you. But if you ask a good question, maybe one of our team members will bring you a glass. Any questions from the audience? So if not, I think from me, my last question before we move into the other parts of our panel today, and you maybe just answered it, to be honest, but what excites you most really about the future of this industry and about logistics and the service that we're talking about in this room today?
What excites me? I love what we do. I love the people we do it with. I love our brands. I like working to make things better. I like watching the team develop and learn, right? One of the things that concerns me in that regards is, I think we've talked about in previous conferences, what's the feeder stream for people into our business, right? I mean, you had the technology conversation earlier today. That should attract people, right? You get away from typical smokestack manufacturing, auto industry stuff. That's one of the things that keeps me up at night. Where's the talent coming from? What's the bench strength? We've got over 30% turnover in our business, right? You can argue lots of reasons for that, but when a 30-year workforce is changing over, where are they going? And if you look to see where some of these talented, I'll say young people are going, it's not the auto industry.
Right.
Other industries value the training that we provide for people to go in other places. Right? So there's going to be more change in the next few years than I've experienced in my 30. That's exciting. I'm glad I'm not going to have to be sitting here doing it. But I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Anu, thank you very much.
Yeah, appreciate it. Enjoyed it. Thanks.
Take the cognac.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, finish it. Yeah. Thanks again to Anu. Great to get, I think, that perspective and an honest perspective as well. I mean, a lot of good things have happened, but also we have some ways to go. You still have some managing upwards to do in this industry in terms of visibility, in terms of getting your boss's attention or the right attention, and the respect that we deserve here. So as you see, we're rearranging the room because we're going to the stage, because we'll have some more joining us shortly. But I thought we'd go back quickly to the polling, actually, because we did ask you, yes, we asked you about the biggest opportunity for North American vehicle imports and exports, and we'll have a couple of other questions we want to pose to you as well. So we'll say it again here. What do you see as the biggest opportunity? U.S. vehicle production, Mexican vehicle production, exports beyond North America, capital investment in ports and hinterland links, or technology advancements in systems and IT, for example. So if you haven't already, please get onto the app, hit the polling button, and give us your opinion. So maybe you were just influenced by Anu, but almost 50% see technology advancement as the biggest opportunity. That certainly would be an area that I think a lot of people obviously agree with here. Pretty much blows the others away. So we know there's a lot of opportunity here. We know there's certain things missing. So interesting to see that. So we have another couple of questions we wanted to put to you. Okay, your prediction here, and obviously this is crystal ball. So how optimistic or pessimistic you are in terms of the outcome of the current NAFTA negotiations? Do you think it's going to create more tariff and or non-tariff barriers to vehicle trade in North America? Do you think it will reduce those tariff or non-tariff barriers? Or do you think it's going to be effectively status quo, little to no change in current vehicle trade? Let's get a sense of what the room thinks. So again, half of you're pretty optimistic. Well, actually, it's an interesting mix there now that I look at it. So almost half see it status quo, but then a pretty good chunk of you actually think it will lead to more barriers, with only 16% seeing it reducing. So we're kind of split. We're kind of split 50-50, if you like, between the sides there. But so little changes comes out ahead. Next question. Okay, back to the tariff issue here as well, which, remember, almost half of the room identified as its biggest challenge currently. So the likeliness that the U.S. will impose tariffs of 20% or more on imports of foreign-made trade, as some of those tweets have indicated, is very likely. Is somewhat likely, is somewhat unlikely, or is highly unlikely. So how do you see that playing out? Ooh, yeah, well, okay, again, I can see why 45% of you put it as such a big risk, because 41% of you think it's somewhat likely, and more than half of you think it's likely, since 12% think it's very likely. But again, the room is, still kind of split between any way it could go, if you do it overall, but somewhat likely for 41%. I think we have another couple questions. So again, an all-out trade war with China would have what impact for the North American vehicle industry and trade? Would it be highly negative for the North American vehicle industry? Would it be somewhat negative? Would it have little impact, somewhat positive, or would it be highly positive? So again, let us know what you think. Yeah, okay, so kind of definitely negative, that's for sure. Dead heat between whether it's really negative or just a little negative, but overall not so great. So the room is also not anticipating or not looking forward to seeing this trade war escalate. Back to a couple of operational questions. How have vehicle inventory levels at US ports developed this year? Is there less inventory at the ports than compared to last year? Are you seeing inventory levels similar to last year, or are they higher than last year? So overall, they're either similar or higher. Half of you say that they're higher. 37% say they're similar. So obviously, partly down to where the bottlenecks we're seeing in some places. Some of this can lead into discussion we're going to have. So we've seen problems, as we've talked about in some of our ideas labs and earlier. There's been some problems with the availability and positioning of rail cars. What do you think the main reason is? Is it because of cost cutting or lack of investment by rail companies? Is it shortage of buy levels as consumers switch to larger vehicles? Is it lack of collaboration between OEMs and logistics stakeholders? Or poor weather, force majeure, issues beyond our control? And there's no all of the above. That's quite deliberate, actually. So let us know what you think. So overall, the blame is being put on the rail companies themselves. 52% of you say that there's not been enough investment or they're cutting costs too much to keep up. And then after that, it's sort of split between the shortage and the lack of collaboration. None of you blame the weather, which I guess is sort of positive. If the responsibility is in the hands of somebody, just half of you don't think it's you. Next question. Looking to Mexico, and perhaps leaving NAFTA aside for the moment, in terms of how do you see the share, the modal split developing? Do you see ocean increasing significantly compared to rail coming to the US and Canada? Do you see it increasing a little bit compared to rail? Do you see the current share staying similar? Will rail actually increase by a small amount versus ocean, or will rail significantly increase? So trying to get a sense of what direction between short sea and rail. Of course, rail the dominant mode right now. Maybe that reflects the makeup, the composition of our delegates. Seeing ocean increasing significantly, 58% against rail. Next followed by a small amount, so ocean is going to come out ahead according to us. 3% of the whole room sees rail increasing at some point in Mexican trade. So maybe we got to get more railroads to this conference. I'm not sure. One more question before we move on to our panel. I thought there was one more question. if there's... So maybe the gods have decided that that's the last question. Let's end that there. We've got plenty of other things to discuss. Thank you for that. It's always interesting, again, to get your honest answers and opinion and sort of take the pulse of the room. So thanks for participating. We'll share those results as well with you after the conference, so you can kind of reflect further on those. So as you've seen, we've been joined on stage by some more experts and practitioners in this industry. We're going to kick off with a presentation. I think actually a lot of what Anu said was probably a nice segue into having a representative from the dealers present to us today, since he's talking about the customer focus that is developed, arguably, hopefully. And then obviously we'll have some Q&A. So I'm very proud that we'll have Brad Miller, who's the Director of Legal and Regulatory Affairs for NADA. So in a moment, I'll have Brad come up here and present. And then Brad will join us in the panel with Alrick Duncan, who's Intercontinental and Port Operations Supervisor at General Motors, and Bobby Hara, who's the Manager of Import and Export Operations for Nissan Group of North America. And I hope you'll all get involved with posing some tough questions to our panel. But to start us off, to get us going, Brad, I'd like to hand over to you.
Great, thank you. Am I on? Great.
You're on.
All right, well, thank you very much. And I want to say, first of all, thank you to everyone here for the invitation. Always happy to provide the dealer perspective. And I've been asked to come sort of talk about the dealer perspective on emerging industry trends. And I know we're sort of the last thing between you and barbecue, so and I am a lawyer by training, so I will talk all day if given the opportunity. I'm going to put my little timer on just so I know how long I have. And I also have to say, I'm kind of digging that hold music. The 10-second hold music is kind of cool. You guys have been hearing that all day, but I'm kind of liking that. So I got a bunch of eye candy for you to look at for a couple minutes before we have our session. You don't have to look at me. But look, we are the National Automobile Dealers Association. I should let you know a little bit about us. We represent the franchise dealers in this country. So we've got about 17,000 members. We're 90+% of the franchise dealers are members of our association. We represent them in Washington, D.C. I am a lawyer, but I'm also, part of my title is Senior Counsel Digital Affairs, which means I've been handling all sorts of issues for dealers with respect to emerging technologies, data issues, and all the exciting things that Anu segued so nicely for us. And so we hope to at least share a little bit about what the dealer perspective is, and frankly, more importantly, what the consumer perspective is, and I want to talk about that a little bit. So again, very quickly, I'm going to talk about some macro trends. I'm thinking to myself, you all are the experts in the room, but I'm thinking, what sort of issues would you like to hear about? I'm going to touch on those briefly, some future trends, and then we're going to spend a little more time on what consumers really want and what we've done to try to determine that and what that may mean for the future. So very briefly, U.S. vehicle sales. This is from our economists, in-house economists. As you can see, they see a relatively stable trend for the SAAR for the next few years. Who knows? We've got sort of rising interest rates. We've got lots of lease returns coming into the marketplace, which are going to have some negative impacts. But overall, the macro trends, at least economically, are up. So those counterbalance in our economist view, and they see a relatively stable SAAR. I think I even heard in the last panel someone allude to this, and I figured it's of interest to you. This is one macro trend that I assume affects your industry quite a bit, which is the shift from cars to light trucks. If you can't see, the cars are the red and the light trucks are the yellow. This is just from 2008 to 2018. We've gone from about 50-50 to we're well on our way to or more than 2/3 now and increasing, and those trends are continuing. So the consumer shift to light trucks and away from cars and sedans is only going to continue, which soon means you'll be shipping larger vehicles. And I learned a term in the last presentation, the buy level. There you go. I already learned a term. So I guess you need those for the trucks. I'm not going to spend much time at all on this. I know it's a big issue for you. I do want to let you know, go to our website, nada.org, if you want more. We have been very involved in this issue recently. Including today. This is just a piece I got from our website from our president and CEO, Peter Welch. We've got a study that's of interest. If any of you are in the advocacy side of things or are interested, We've commissioned a study that's looking at it from the perspective we always try to look at things from, which is what's the impact on the consumer? What's going to be the likely effect on the added cost of an average new vehicle if tariffs are imposed? So I encourage you to look at that. It's out there, and we have been very active along with the Alliance and Global, the OEM associations and others working on this issue from a variety of viewpoints. Okay, so that's the brief macro overview, and feel free to shout questions if you have them or any time. But let me talk, this is really sort of what I've asked to talk about, I think. Future trends, how are they going to impact the dealership model, and of course, how may that impact you at some point in time. There's a little acronym. Some people say CASE, some people say ACES. I think it's one of those things that's going to float away, but it's useful for what it's worth. What are the four real big things we're talking about in our world? You've got autonomy, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. You've got connectivity, and then electric vehicles and shared vehicles. And they each present, even though they're sort of lumped together in many ways, they each present different issues, and they're each at a different stage, I think, in both their rollout and their adoption by consumers, and I think the impact for dealers. Now, autonomy, look, there's a lot going on. I will say from a DC perspective, you've got the AV bill. There's a federal bill, for those of you who don't know, that's really awaiting. It's sailed through the House, it sailed through the Senate the first time around, at least mostly. Now it's just awaiting a final vote in the Senate, and it's been interesting because there are a number of folks who have sort of woken up, and now there's some opposition to it. And so it was going along very quickly. There's recently been some talk that it may be added to what's called the FAA reauthorization bill, so maybe pushed through this summer, but it's looking less and less likely. And really, this is dealing with ways that OEMs will have the opportunity to roll out larger fleets of autonomous vehicles on the roads, whether it's for testing purposes or a new word in our world, which is deployment, whatever that means, and it's not very well defined. But it's out there, and it's a live issue. I will say, I can just tell you the folks in DC have drunk the Kool-Aid completely on AVs, and I'm not sure I've been to I went to a Senate hearing where the markup was discussed. Bipartisan sort of questions were, what can we do to sort of get out of the way of the development of this? So there are a lot of folks who see this. I know there's a lot of international competitive pressures. On the other hand, from the dealer perspective, I'll tell you EVs, and Anu touched on this a little bit, we see it in some ways as a bit of a pushing down to the consumer. Connectivity, we're seeing a lot of consumer demand for. People come in and they want connected features in their vehicles, and they purchase vehicles based on those connected features. We're not seeing the huge consumer demand at this point for autonomy, or for electric vehicles, or for autonomous vehicles, because they're not particularly here yet. So again, we've got the longstanding technical issues on the electric front. How long do they take to recharge? What's the infrastructure look like? What's the cost? We've got some of the OEMs who are now running up against their EV tax credits, which will be interesting to see how the market responds to that. And so, there are a lot of these things mixing together, and then we have shared. And shared is this sort of catch-all term for, in some cases, it could actually be a shared car. I think most of the time people say shared, they mean sort of e-taxis, right? Uber and Lyft, those type of things. And from a dealer perspective, these things only become, I think, an issue for us. We can sell electric vehicles. I know Anu, he's right. A lot of folks are predicting that the service levels may change. That's not going to impact the dealer model all that much, or frankly, consumers. Connectivity doesn't really change things. It's when autonomy is here and it's combined with shared, right? And we're in a world where folks no longer own their own car because they just call up a car to use when they need it. And there are a lot of folks who are putting a lot of money on that proposition. Now, this is, and for those of you who haven't seen it before, this is sort of the hype cycle. I think, I'm trying to remember who it was. It wasn't McKinsey, it was Gartner, I think, put this together. When a new technology comes out, there's a predictable pattern of how this goes. And I think, it starts out with the trigger, a huge wave of inflated expectations. And I think the sense is we're sort of right past the peak. That's when the first negative press stories start coming out. This is autonomy we're talking about. And I'll just tell you, for those of you who are trying to sort of predict how long this is going to take and when it's going to happen, it's only once you come down through the trough of disillusionment there and come back up the slope that you even approach sort of 3 to 5% of the market adopting these products. So who knows how long this stretch is, but I throw it up there for a little bit of a background for folks that have looked at other technologies and how they've been adopted. All right, you can't read this slide, but I just put it in there just to show you what's going on. This is just a sampling of the companies who are spending a lot of money chasing this pie. There is a huge first mover advantage. Everyone wants to be, right, Google and not Bing, because if you're the first, there's a perception, certainly in Silicon Valley, that you will have a first mover advantage, and as we know, there are folks willing to lose a lot of money on the come to be that first mover. And so the point of this slide is really, hey, there's a lot of money chasing this. There's a lot of big question about what the payoff's going to be, but there's no doubt there's real money chasing it. And you can't see this one at all, but this one is of interest because, of course, this shows the connection between the manufacturers and the mobility companies. So let's think about a dealer's perspective. Your OEM, who is your lifeblood, right? That's what you do. You sell and service their cars and trucks. They're now saying that they're a mobility company or they're a data company. They're not a manufacturer anymore. May raise a question mark or two as a dealer, right? I'm still an auto dealer. I still sell and service cars and trucks. So I'm not sure what you're doing at the manufacturer level, but there's a lot of interplay between OEMs and manufacturers. In the meantime, we have competing business models. Now, this is where the shared piece comes in. Make no mistake that the business model, avowed business model of the shared companies, and these headlines sort of tell you that, is to replace private ownership and as it says, go neck and neck with car dealerships. So unaffordable, make Uber so affordable that riding Uber consistently becomes cheaper and easier than actually owning a car. So this is the vision that they're chasing, is you don't own your own car, you just call it up on your app and it comes to get you and you take it where you need to go all the time in lieu of owning your own car. Is it happening? There's some studies out there. This is a Silicon Valley study that purports to show that there are folks dropping their personal cars for ride sharing only. Who knows? It's a lot here, and I don't know if you'll get the slides later, but this shows about 8 to 11%, according to their studies, have actually reported that they're now taking ride sharing in lieu of owning at least one or more of their cars. There's a big question about what the sample is. If you're sampling 1,000 people in downtown San Francisco who are 24 to 27, maybe that's true, but who knows? We're not seeing it in the marketplace yet, but there are some data points out there. Here's another Silicon Valley study. I pulled out the highlight for you there. They predict car dealers cease to exist by 2024. The idea, of course, is if nobody owns their car anymore, they don't need to service it anymore. Why do you need a car dealership? Because it'll all be owned by fleets. I know Anu mentioned a 30% figure. Of course, there are folks out there predicting 80, 90, 100%. You see by 2030, it's basically 100% fleet owned. Okay, so that's sort of the overarching atmosphere. You've got Silicon Valley and Wall Street who are pressuring the OEMs and predicting that this change is inevitable and coming right around the corner. Now, of course, I would note, I'm sure it's just coincidental that most venture capital funds have sort of a 3 to 5 year cash out window, but that they'd like to, so the fact that it's coming in 3 to 5 years is completely coincidental. But put that aside, that's the atmosphere we're living in as a dealer, and that is the threat from a dealer perspective. I don't think electric vehicles, I don't think share alone, I don't think connectivity is going to have that great of an effect on the dealer market, but it's that combination of the two. True level 5, and I don't want to bore you with the levels, but full autonomy, a car that can be autonomous anywhere, all the time, combined with the shared fleet ownership would have an impact on the dealer model. So, I mentioned earlier that one of the issues here from our perspective is that, this seems in many ways, certainly from the EV side and even a little bit maybe from the AV side, to have been pushed from the top down. We don't have folks, I'm just telling, I don't own a dealership, but dealers report to us, nobody's coming in sort of asking for the autonomous vehicle at sale at the dealership yet. Now, maybe there's a reason for that, and autonomy has some demand, but we're not seeing it as a consumer-driven model. In fact, I put this quote up here. This was actually from a panel at the Consumer Electronics Show, I think maybe last year. It just struck me as funny, because I think it's sort of the way that there's a mindset out there that says, do consumers know they want AVs? right? I mean, they should want them. Do they know they want them? It's not saying how much do they want them. Have we looked? Have we asked consumers? Do they know they want them yet? So here's what we decided to do. We went to ask some people. Okay, how about that? That's a good idea. We've got the Luntz Group. I don't know if you know Frank Luntz. He's got a polling operation. We got over 1,200 consumers. We heavily oversampled from millennials. We heavily oversampled in Boston and LA, as you can see. So urban, millennial, right? I mean, everybody knows about their cousin's nephew who's 23 and lives at home and rents out the garage on Airbnb and doesn't own a car and never will and shares his bike, But is that really true? Is that the market? We want to know what the reality is. So we went and asked some people. That's what we did. We prepped. We said, after explaining all the safety benefits of AVs and shared mobility, and said this will, is predicted to save you thousands of dollars a year. Even after all that, 89% reported that they'd still prefer to keep their personal car. You can see the breakout. There is a slight difference between the millennials and the 35 and over. Now remember, millennials is sort of 18 to 35, right? That's how that's defined. Surprise, surprise, it makes a big difference if you're 18 to 24 and you live in an urban city and you don't have kids, or if you're 27 to 35 and you're starting to have kids and move to the suburbs. People, there's still a predicted way that people live their lives that the survey, at least has shown us, is not changing yet. But that was a pretty definitive statement that folks would rather, even knowing what they know, keep their personal car. The other argument, of course, is, hey, the car sits there. I think I hear this it's in one of the mantras you hear. The car sits doing nothing 96% of the time. That's inefficient. That's a waste of your resources. You could do it more cheaply if you just did this exclusive ride hailing. People don't see their car as an expense. Now, it's oversimplification. And by the way, I'm just giving you a summary. There's more on our website if you're interested. But 93% of the folks said the car is freedom. It's not a hassle. Right? And there's a lot more that I don't have time to talk to you about how much people are willing to pay in terms of their time to wait for the AVs to be summoned compared to how much they're willing to pay for a car. I mean, look, if a car was a purely economic decision, I'm not sure we wouldn't all be riding in stripped economic subcompact cars, right? That's not the way the world works, and it's not the way the world works either for millennials or those older. So, bottom line with all this, we heard this sentiment time and time again. Why would I want to give up my car when I could just keep my car and do the ride sharing, right? I mean, look, it's going to supplement, it's not going to supplant, is what we've seen in terms of our polling. That's what people are telling us. Again, who knows? This is all crystal ball gazing, but it certainly makes sense from our perspective to ask the people who know what they want and what they value in the things that they have. What about AVs? We did ask them, and it is interesting because we did take pains to sort of explain the benefits, the safety benefits, and I should take 30 seconds. The safety benefit, you'll hear this as a mantra as well. If you haven't heard it, you'll hear it again. 94% of all accidents were caused by human beings. 36,000 people died on the highways last year. Therefore, we need AVs to save 35,570, whatever, right? Now, that's a big syllogism that doesn't always stick. I've seen, in fact, NHTSA has put out information saying that certain level 2 technologies, that for those of you who know, that's sort of, it's connected vehicles talking to each other but not driving itself, would bring 80% of the safety benefit at 10% of the cost. And so, but all that said, we explained to people the safety benefits, the potential economic benefits. 56% they would consider purchasing an AV, 44% would not. My personal opinion, this was not in the surveys, my personal opinion is people don't, when you say AVs, I'm not sure people fully understand. I think, again, this is not NADA, this is Brad Miller, I think people mostly think of my car that I can push a button and it drives itself, not a car that I am not capable of driving, which is what seems to be a lot of what's being planned. No steering wheel, no brake pedal at all, right? But even what they knew, 56%, 44% would not. Again, I told you about the safety increase. 80% would prefer the level 2 with the safety impact, and 20% said they want the level 5 fully autonomous, even at the additional cost, which is of interest. But, and I can't help but go over, I'm sorry. In our mind, one of the risks here, so we now know what consumers want, right? In our mind, frankly, one of the risks here is that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it's already kind of being pushed that way. This is a statement that Lyft and Uber both signed off on earlier this year. Due to the critical transformational potential of AVs, it's critical that all AVs are part of shared fleets, right? So it's not enough that you have an AV. The policy position that's being put forward by folks is that it all has to be part of a fleet. We think people want to own their own cars, even if they're AVs. There's a difference of opinion, certainly based on a business model. How is that happening? This is happening right now at the state and local level all around the country. There are efforts to increase tolls, to restrict parking. I can tell you, we're in suburban Virginia, Tysons, Virginia. There's a lot of redevelopment because the train just came in, which is a whole other conversation. We could talk about public transit. But it's amazing how all sorts of new developments are coming in, and the restrictions in the parking are amazing to me. I'm not sure how they think these folks are going to live. But people are building things now and putting infrastructure in place now that is insufficient to handle current parking needs based on this assumption that this future is coming in the near future. So, look, there have been calls, banning ownership in certain areas and at certain times. You see it, requiring them to be in fleets, prohibiting driving. We did talk to the folks in the survey about that. The only thing shocking about this is that 16% support it to me, but 15.6 support prohibiting driving of personally owned cars in city centers, but the vast majority oppose that, as they do reducing the number of places you can park. So this is one of the, 50 years ago, everyone said you have to put the freeway right through your downtown if you want to keep up with the new technologies, and that has not turned out so well in many urban areas. We think there's a risk that the same thing's happening at the state and local level now. So with all that said, hope that helps. I warned you that I can't help myself. I went over, so I apologize. But thank you again for the opportunity to present on that issue, and there's lots more on our website if you want any more details. So thanks again.
Thanks, Brad.
I'm so sorry.
No, that's all right. Thanks, Brad. I think that's important. Interesting research there. Interesting poll studies. The voice of the customer. Hey, fancy that? Ask them what they think. What an idea. And so I think that is very valuable as we look across the future and how it may change. And now in the panel, we get a chance to also maybe think about what the logistics side of it could also mean in terms of what we see now and what we see sort of developing. So maybe I'd like to just start us perhaps a little bit back where Anu began it, when he talked about what he liked most over time. He's seen more focus on the customer as in the guy driving, the person buying or driving the car, not necessarily the wholesaler or the regional and such, in terms of logistics focus. So I want to open to the panel. Start maybe with Rick. Do you think is that the case that you've seen for GM in your job now? I mean, do you have much, be it not contact or consideration, communication, visibility, back and forth with the customer? Does it impact what you do compared to what you've done before? And then I'd like to hear also from Bobby on that.
Yeah, most definitely. I know for General Motors right now, I mean, one of our main focus is to pretty much put the customer in front of everything we do. They're in the center of everything we focus on. So I know we've invested a lot of money in technology, especially getting vehicles to the customer as fast as possible. We've opened up a lot of options when it comes to like dealer pickups from our VDCs, our ports, different avenues to ensure that they do get these vehicles on time. So I know that that's a lot of money, and then also in our logistics and pretty much in our whole supply chain, we are actually looking at different programs and different technology and use OnStar to bridge this gap to ensure that we put the customer first.
Yeah, and we do something similar. We don't have OnStar, but the ultimate customer should be satisfied because that will improve the brand image of any OEM. And we do have something, we're using RFID pilot at one of the plants to see if we move to telematics in the future. We don't want to start off at zero, so like a proving ground, we're going to see what we get off that. We have some ETA projects of trying to predict when the vehicle will get to the dealer. We measure those and see where there's kinks and improvements in the supply chain.
Yeah. Brad, can you give us some perspective of what do your dealers, or do you have any sense of what they say to NADA? Do they, is this sort of visibility from logistics, has it gotten better? Is it a big issue for them?
Well, it's a good question. We don't always hear every issue dealers have, but if there's a problem, we tend to hear about it, as I'm sure some of you in this room do as well. And the good news is we don't hear a ton about it. I will say you won't be surprised that I actually went and solicited some feedback, especially from large dealer groups that have insight across different manufacturers. And the same manufacturers, I'm not naming names, but the same manufacturers came up time and again saying, yeah, they could do better. And from the dealer perspective, it's, we want to know, none of this is surprising, I'm sure to you, we want to know where it is, we want a faster turnaround, and we think that, frankly, we should be doing a better job using data to predict what we're going to want and need in 3 months, especially given the lead times of their ordering than we do now. So that's, those are the broad areas that I've heard. I think most of the folks were pretty happy. But there were instances, it was interesting because having spoken to a number of folks, I could sort of see the patterns. And of course, in particular, when it's coming from overseas, it creates particular, if you have to order a car 4 months out, the market in your area may have changed. So anyway, but mostly positive for the most part.
It's interesting, and the ETA visibility. So maybe we can throw it to the panel again. I mean, we've mentioned some projects going on, but it's been my observation that in the US there's been less provision of the ETA to dealers than some other parts of the world where that was kind of given as a matter of course. But is that sort of changing now, or have I got it kind of wrong? So do the dealers get an ETA immediately, or do they get it updated along the way? How does it work?
I mean, normally what it is just a lead time that we have built into our system, and we try to improve that lead time across the supply chain to ensure that dealer do get their vehicles on time. I mean, if there is like an exception where we do have hot vehicles or a VIP customer, we'll handle that accordingly. But usually we just stick to like a lead time that we have, especially like you mentioned in here about vehicles coming from overseas. That is a big impact for us, because we probably base 60, 90 days roughly to get that vehicle to the end customer. But as you know, we've been challenging Q1. We faced a lot of problems with lack of rail cars, truck capacity, all across the network. That really impacted us. So we saw longer lead times that definitely impacted our customer along the way.
Yeah. Similar for you, Nissan, Bobby?
Yeah, when we provide it, there's different trigger points. I mean, if you place an order over the dealer, depending on if it's coming overseas, they'll give them a rough idea until it gets scheduled. But like FedEx, they don't give you an ETA until they get their hands on the package. Yeah. So once we receive it, we know we're going to get it, then we'll provide an ETA. Yeah. But it's broad. I mean, we don't control the supply chain like FedEx or UPS. We don't have the planes, and we have to rely on everyone to do their job. Yeah. So we give them a little bit of a range. Because we can't say you're going to get it by 8 p.m. on, tonight. There's no way we can do that.
Yeah. I would just add, I think there are exceptions to this, but the dealer model, for those of you who don't know, I've been in NADA 10 years. I know I didn't realize this until I've been in NADA a while. Why do dealers have such large inventories? Why do they have to incur the cost to have all those cars there? Because Americans like to have what they want the second they want it. They will lose sales to someone across town if they don't have the maroon one in stock. So that is an issue. So it makes it a little less mission critical in some ways, because of course there's not that often a customer is coming in and ordering for shipment from the factory. But it's still, from their perspective, it affects the product mix on their lot. And again, I think just like everywhere else, I think the good news is I think there's tremendous upside to use the data that's out there to maybe work with the OEMs to improve the mix and the vehicles that they. There's a double-edged sword there. Dealers don't want to. They know how it is if someone says you need to take all these cars, whether they want to or not. But they want to work with the manufacturers more closely to make sure they're meeting market demands. And I think there's data to do that.
Absolutely. I mean, we had discussion in some of our, I believe in some of the ideas labs, and I think Michael from Volkswagen maybe brought this up as well, the potential for home deliveries, and where, I mean, where do you see that from an NADA point of view? I mean, I'm not sure if your surveys would show anything kind of yet, but from an NADA point of view, and then also from the car makers, if that's anything that you also already even have some experience even with on a small scale, and how you see that going forward.
It's a complicated question because I think a lot of dealers do that kind of thing already, and dealers do what needs to be done to make the customer happy. There's a whole boring, complicated regulatory overlay that raises. But yeah, look, I think that's the way the world's going. You know, we're all striving to doing more and more of the transaction online, which is going to necessarily impact the delivery mechanism, and I think that's definitely coming.
I mean, I've heard that brought up within the company, but, you know, like you said, in your time frame thing, how long?
Yeah.
How long will it take? Will it be
Right.
within 5 years, 10 years? I have no idea.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the same thing for General Motors. I mean, it's definitely a discussion point, something we're looking at, but I really don't have the details behind it of when it's actually going to happen, but I could see it happening in the future.
You did actually mention that there's some, or at least the dealer can pick up in some locations. Is that what you mentioned right in the beginning, right?
Yeah, I mean, we do provide that option.
Yeah.
Basically, if there's any issues within our network, we want to get our vehicles to our customers as soon as possible. So we do open up the option of a dealer could come and pick up a vehicle from the port, the VDC, or any location it is, depending on how close the proximity, because you definitely don't want a dealer driving 50, 75 miles pretty much to pick up a vehicle. But if they're within close proximity and basically our domestic network is unable to get the vehicle to the customer, we'll go ahead and do that.
And that would sort of parallel what we've seen something on the service side as well, sort of drop points or different sorts of delivery models to sort of help a dealer who might be able to pick up parts for same day, for example. So it sort of carries on there. We had a question via the app here, and Rick, it's for you really, although the others might have a comment, is that in North America, I thought OnStar had prohibited itself being used commercially in the past. When did they have this policy change? So has there been a change? Was there a point when OnStar wasn't meant to be used or something like this, or is it open to that?
Repeat that question?
So the question was that the delegate has asked if they thought OnStar wasn't supposed to be used commercially in this sort of way. So I guess to use OnStar to sort of track the vehicle or delivery. Was there a change in policy, or is this
So
new?
internally, and within GM, we do have mechanisms to ping a vehicle, to understand where the vehicle is, if it's stuck somewhere, or we lost the keys, or something of that nature. We have the technology to locate. As long as that vehicle has power connectivity, we can find that vehicle. I mean, if it's on a vessel, of course, we probably can't find it if it's out in the Atlantic Ocean somewhere or Pacific. But if it's somewhere within the U.S. or Canada, we have the mechanism to do that.
Right. And then presumably this is sort of switched off once. I mean, you need data consent in the customer.
And sometimes you have difficulty actually pinging it. So I'm not saying it's 100%, but we have found vehicles before. I can testify to that.
I mean, it's coming up, I'm sure it's come up in the other sessions as well. So do we see telematics or in-vehicle connectivity as becoming an increasingly, let's say, essential part of the logistics process in terms of the communication, in terms of geolocating, or is that only one small part of the solution? Again, is there any kind of discussion around this even at the dealer level, or?
Well, sure. I mean, there are tremendous issues about the gathering, use, and both leveraging and protection of data coming from the car, what dealers are going to need. That tends to be post-sale consumer issues. I do think that it seems to me from the outside looking in, there are some opportunities for insight from the dealer on the ordering process and all the issues, logistics issues you deal with based on the massive amounts of data coming from these cars.
But I think one issue with telematics, I mean, you're going to have all this information.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, all the technology is outpacing, I'll say, growing a lot faster than when I started.
Yeah.
So analyzing all that information, what you can do with it, what's relevant, what's important, I'm sure we'll find something in there, but we're going to need a crazy supercomputer to figure all this out.
Yeah, absolutely. So we saw in our survey that the audience still sees vehicle inventory rising. There's capacity issues at ports. There's congestion, particularly for GM and Nissan. I mean, how are you responding to some of these challenges? Have you expanded your port network? Have you looked for alternatives? Have you changed any of the processes to deal with that? Maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely just recently found some opportunities. Just like I said, Q1, I'm sure for all the OEMs, was very, very challenging. But based on that, you know, when you have some negative impacts to your network, there's times you could find opportunities. And just recently, we were able to just open up a new port, Port Davisville, where we were able to, you know, divert some of our traffic that normally would go other places. We were able to put it into another port, which makes it closer to our customer, and it worked out efficiently for everyone. So those are some of the things that we've done.
Yeah. Anything on Nissan side?
And actually, we're going to open up a new port next year in Tacoma, Washington. There are some challenges in LA at the current site. But to your point about what we're trying to do, we don't control the dealer assignments, you know, so we have to work with sales and everyone else. And we'll have to do what we have to do. Get the car, keep the port fluid, or get the car to the dealer.
Yeah, I can't understand why customers don't buy cars where you have your ports. I mean, that would just make everything much easier.
No. We like our hometown dealer network. It's a wonderful thing.
Obviously, any questions, comments from the audience, please. We have mics going around. Feel free to ask a question, or obviously just add a comment into.
You know, Chris, let me. I'm just thinking. You know, something that we haven't touched on that, from my perspective, is something that should be in top of mind for all of you, is the impact of subscription plans. You know, there's a lot of question right now about how that all is going to work, to the extent the OEMs are. You know, who knows how it's going to play out, but my suspicion is the dealers will play a role in logistically from managing those fleets, even if they're owned by the OEMs or if they're owned by the dealer. But I suspect that's going to be something that the folks in this room are going to be tackling over the coming years, if that model does in fact gain traction in the marketplace. Because you know, when the customer no longer owns the car, the owner of that car has got tremendous new added responsibilities to get it from point A to point B and make sure it's taken care of. So I throw that out there, as I'm sure you've probably touched on it in the conference, but we're seeing that certainly being an emerging trend. And from the dealer perspective, we're saying, well, look, the dealer is going to play a part in this because we are the physical locations and every community makes sense. But there's going to need to be a lot of more coordination with our OEM friends to make sure that happens right. So.
Well, we can start with the OEMs on the panel. I mean, clearly, it may not be relevant to your business today, or maybe only a very, very small part, even for any company. But do you see a potential move towards a more fleet-oriented business, things like that? Is there a role for vehicle logistics to actually get involved in that space, or do you see that more as something that would, you know, be managed by third parties or even, you know, by dealers, or any perspective on that?
Yeah, I'll pass on that one. That one.
Unfortunately, I will too, but if the business dictates that we're involved, then obviously we will have to be involved.
Yeah, no, fair enough. You know, it is an interesting, I mean, we were chatting about it a bit before as well. I think that, you know, maybe if you want to share a bit, Brad, that this is an area that maybe dealers get a little bit more interested in and excited about than some of the because there's still strong involvement. Even if it's not ownership, it's different necessarily to the shared kind of ride fleet thing.
It is. I mean, look, I think that it's a logical way to fill in the gaps in the spectrum between daily rental ownership, right? You've got daily rental, you've got you know, maybe some of these subscription long-term rental programs, leasing, full ownership, right? I mean, it's just, you're just filling in, and you're filling in the gaps where the market demand is. I will say it's interesting to me that the subscriptions have been tended to congregate in the higher end of the market, because anecdotally, I can tell you what dealers are finding, at least with some of the subscription programs they're running is that it's been a big hit among the lower credit tiers, folks who are able to get the subscription with a credit card rather than obtaining financing in the subprime market. So just an interesting tidbit, one of those unintended things that I think happens in the marketplace where people expected it here and it ends up in a different place. So.
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting point. So again, if we have another 10, 15 minutes that we'll be chatting here, so if any comments or questions along the way, please do interrupt me. There's again a bit more for the manufacturers on the panel here. Obviously, the theme of the conference around gateways to the future and upgrading our import-export processes. And I just wondered if you're benchmarking sort of best-in-class ports and operations, looking as to what you'd like to see from the port of the future, or whether that's or even of today, whether it's in other regions as well. So maybe what GM or Nissan sees around the world. Do you want to share any thoughts on what should be happening to upgrade our import-export processes to be fit for purpose?
Yeah, I mean, definitely one thing I do is when I visit the ports, I try to understand what our competitors are doing, what are the other OEMs are doing, what type of visibility tools they're using, how are they managing their inventory currently at port, what are the do's, what are the don'ts. I definitely think those are key. But as from a port perspective, I think technology, I said this last year and I'll say it again, is continuing to advance technology. That is very, very important, providing different tools to the OEMs so that we understand, what is going on with our products, how long is it taking to be processed, is there any form of threats or any constraints that we're going to see for the upcoming future, so that when our vessels, and I'm only speaking General Motors, are going to arrive, what are we going to expect, so that we can create a contingency plan to ensure that we can get our vehicles to our customer as fast as possible, because as I mentioned, our customer is the center of everything we do. So those are some of the key things that I would say for the port processors to do.
And to the extent we can, we do benchmark. It's easier to do within Nissan globally, but what happens in Europe is totally different from what happens in North America, but we do benchmark. That's a lot easier to do. But if we can benchmark other OEMs, kind enough to share best practices, we're more than willing to, not trade secrets, of course, but just understand what's best.
One of the things that came up in the first session, we talked about port services, things like accessorization, customization that happens at ports. This is perhaps also interesting for dealers to some extent as well. Do you see further development, more services, more kinds of post-manufacture operations potentially going into ports or at other facilities, before it hits the dealer as a point like that? So is that something you see kind of increasing or changing, or?
Yeah, I would say for right now, I would say they're probably increasing. Definitely, we've changed our business model slightly. We've done some programs at some ports where we started adding some accessories to the Middle East. That is something that we're doing now. So we'll study the business cases as they move forward with the accessories team, and understand, does it make sense, or is it the best thing for the company, total enterprise cost.
And we do accessorize at the ports for the imports, and the exports we do it at the origin plant. Sure. But what you said, our accessory group and whoever, they're the ones who tell us, hey, we need to do this, right? There'll be obviously time studies and see if it pencils.
Yeah. So from a dealer perspective, do dealers, I know it will vary, but that accessory work, some OEMs have different models where more dealers might be responsible for more of the accessorization. Honda, for example, versus other. Is that, where the dealers lie on that? Do they want more of that? Do they see that as value added for them, or stuff that's like, no, please don't?
It's a good question. My initial take is my dealers will probably be very excited to get the additional business, and please bring it in-house. Yeah. It is interesting. It's a growing segment of the market, certainly, and it's one of those places where the regional differences are really huge. In certain parts of the country where dealers have their own massive vehicle customization capacity they built in their own operations. So places like that, I think there'd be a variety of impacts. And I think that's one of the messages from the dealers I talked to was there are differences in this big country.
Yeah.
And, you know, sometimes one size fits all may not be great, so let's work together on doing what's right for our market. In our market, it may make sense, in others, it may not.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, one of the issues that have come up this year quite a bit, and we saw that a little in our survey around rail issues, whether that's in and out of ports or elsewhere, positioning of the rail cars, issues with Mexico. Again, for the OEMs on the panel, we talked earlier about things you've done, measures you've taken to address some of the port issues. You see address issues, solutions on the rail side as well. Do you agree with the panel, with the vote that basically said it's just, you know, railroads need to invest in more capacity, or is it a bit more complicated than that?
No, I mean, I definitely think as the business is changing, the business model is changing where more customers are switching to, you know, crossovers and SUVs, bi-levels is definitely needed, and it definitely impacted us a huge amount because I felt that pain, trust me. So I know exactly what we went through to make sure we meet our financials through that time. So definitely I think that the rail companies need to put some more investment into their programs. Yes.
I agree as well. Sorry, guys.
And Brad even learned the word bi-level now.
I tell you, I feel edified. Yes, thank you very much.
So we need to maybe explain to dealers that, you know, sometimes it literally.
I thought it was one of those buses in London. Huh?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, maybe if maybe we can ship some of them over.
Okay.
That can sort of help with the capacity issues. Again, we're kind of running near to the end here, but you know, and you might start be thinking about the cocktail hour coming up. You saw those cognacs, which were taken away from me, by the way. I don't know if you noticed that. That obviously my team decided that I wouldn't be much good running this had I actually drank the whole thing. But any last questions or points from the audience for our panel? Well, you're thinking about dinner and stuff, and I do understand it. But I think, you know, so last point for me. Same thing that I asked Anu to finish with, which is maybe just what's exciting you for the future now. What excites you in your area that you're working with? What's coming? Obviously, with so much technological changes, market shifts, lots of questions and uncertainty as well. But what excites you most? What do you see motivating your teams?
I would definitely say there's a lot of energy in the logistics world right now. So many different technologies, so many different challenges, the infrastructure changes, you know, all the different challenges we face on a daily basis. But I would say greatly the way how everybody works together to find a solution, you know, from your ocean carrier to your port processor to your truck carrier, whatever you need to find that solution. I definitely see there's a lot of energy pushing behind that. So those are the things that definitely excite me on a daily basis. You face a lot of highs, a lot of lows, always not a lot of highs, but some more lows than anything, but I definitely see that that's the key.
And technology aside, every day is not the same. Like you said, there's challenges every day. You know, our job is to work with everybody, or what you can control, or what you know, you have to fix the problem. I won't say it's a big problem, but, you know, whatever's happening that day, and you have to overcome it, mitigate it, find solutions, perhaps make it better, and move forward.
Yeah. What about from a dealer point of view?
Oh boy, you know, it's funny. I mentioned I've been at NAD about 10 years, and so I had some auto industry experience before that, but not as much as the folks in this room. Yeah. I've learned about dealers. They're great to work for and work with, and they're amazing entrepreneurs. You know, everyone says that this is going to be an era of change. If you're willing to take risks, and these folks are risk takers, and you're a good business person and a good salesperson and a good entrepreneur, you're going to do well. So I feel confident for our folks. I do think there's a heck of a lot of upside in all sorts of aspects, including in the logistics side of things, in terms of the information we're going to have access to, our ability to leverage it to make the consumer experience better, to keep both OEMs and dealers as competitive as we can be in the future. So it's exciting.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's positive notes, I think, to kind of end our discussion on and to end the kind of, let's say, conference part of our event here. First of all, I want to thank the three of you again for joining us. So thank you to our panel. And thanks indeed to all of you for joining us here. We're not quite done with you yet, though, so please do join us after we finish here. It's just literally across the way. You'll see, I think, M&S Grill by the harbor, and so we'll have some people directing you, and then the Tira Nogues is there, so it's just across the way, and we'll get you in there. It's hot out there, folks, so do feel free to I don't know, lose your socks or do whatever you can to make yourself comfortable. But because we got a nice barbecue, we've got some drinks hosted by the Port of Baltimore, so it's going to be a great event. But you know, we're business casual here, so whatever you need to do. I think it's been a great day here. I think, you know, we've covered a lot of interesting topics. We know we have a lot of the day-to-day issues. Just because the day-to-day doesn't make them simple, though, right? Whether it's around the rail capacity, the port capacity, communication issues, factory holds, quality holds, all the kind of stuff that can really shut things down and slow things down, and then it's lingering in the background are not so small challenges and questions around tariffs and all NAFTA, all those kinds of things. But as I said at the beginning of the event, you know, we get somewhere by coming together, we get somewhere by working together, and this is not an industry that, you know, that works in any segment, doesn't work in isolation. It's all connected and part of the system. So we appreciate you being here, appreciate you sharing your issues and your challenges and your solutions as well, because we think there's a lot to gain from them there. Before I let you go, can I remind everyone to please, if you haven't already, give us some of your feedback. Again, the evaluation forms which are there. Fill it in, leave it there, give it to one of our team members now or later in the evening if you prefer to do it that way, but just do take a moment to do that. And you know, again, we'll continue the conversations across the way at the dinner now, but just to remind you as well, we have our Automotive Logistics Global Conference in about 5-6 weeks in Detroit. Hope to see many of you there. If you're interested, speak to us. A lot of the same people will be there. We're obviously covering the whole supply chain in Detroit, but finished vehicles is an essential part of all that. So please do consider that. And you know, we've got you can see all the cities and places in which we do events. I won't read them all off here, but you can see why my girlfriend forgets my name most often at times, because we spend a lot of time around the world covering this sector based on what you guys are interested in. So you know, what the industry is telling us to do, and we continue to do that. So thank you again. Thank you to all of our speakers. Thank you to our sponsors. And please come join us now at the Port of Baltimore Gala Dinner. Thank you.